Hey everybody, this is Craig from the University of Applied Research and Development, and this is our Emergency Managers video cast. And I've got Don Bouffard here for us, and he's recently retired from the Michigan State Police and their emergency management team, and also from the Department of Homeland Security. Don, delighted to have you with us.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you. It's kind of semi-retirement. I'm going to probably do some contract work.
Okay. Well, just so everyone knows who might be watching the recording or joins us live, we've got a little bit of a delay with our connection. So I'll be making sure that I ask a question and pause significantly long to make sure that Don has a chance to answer. And you may notice that the audio is not completely in sync with the video. So just bear with us because Don's got some great things to share. And I thought that those of you that are interested in emergency management or considering emergency management as a career, there are so many different things that you could do in the industry. And Don's going to be able to give us an example of something you could do that you may not have thought of, being a lead engineer with a number of initiatives, both in the public and the private realm. So Don, why don't you tell us about what you've done? You were introducing it to me recently, why you got interested in emergency management.
Yeah. Well, I started out in the private sector, spent most of my life in the private sector as what's called a systems engineer. And I got a chance to work for Michigan State Police, Emergency Management, Homeland Security Division. And I took the job, and I remember being totally amazed that there were this group of people that spent like all day, every day, figuring out how to save everybody, all the preparation and how complex it was. For my part, being an engineer, what I liked about it is it's a highly specialized form of technical support and engineering. In fact, in the States, at least, most state and county level governments or local level governments have centralized IT departments. And they're all about standardization, cutting costs and making everybody the same. The reason that our positions even exist is because the emergency management technology and engineering is so specialized that the larger IT departments can't handle it. And it's specialized in that it's highly 100% mission critical all the time. So you have to be prepared for low probability, high impact events, which are events that happen like once every 200 years. It might be a massive solar flare or or a pandemic, or you have to also be prepared though for the low impact, high probability events, which might be like shear winds or hail or flooding in the spring. And that's what appealed to me as an engineer.
Now, an engineer is different than being an IT and different than being an electrician. And would you like to define the difference for us, just so we're really clear about the role that you had?
Yeah, there's actually 3 or 4 technical people in my area. So you have an IT analyst. That's a person that takes care of the networks, the computers, the daily needs, cybersecurity, things like that. But based on your engineering specialty, you also take care of things like I'm an electrical engineer. And there would be a mechanical engineers, civil engineers, structural engineers. So I was also involved in facilities. So I was involved in the construction and specification of an emergency operations center. So electrical things like, is the facility hardened against EMP? Triple redundancy on generators, backup septic systems, backup well systems, hardened facility construction is highly specialized also. There are architects and construction firms that specialize in it. So when you're an engineer, you can be technical and do IT in the electrical engineering realm, but you also do other things too as an engineer.
So that term that you've mentioned, Don, hardened facilities, hardened means that there are these redundancies and it's not going to be affected by different types of attacks like EMP. Is that correct?
Yes. One of the most satisfying and biggest things that I did was the state of Michigan constructed a new hardened emergency operations center. And in my past life, because I had worked for architects as an electrical engineer designing power and lighting, and I had worked for construction companies as an engineer and a project manager implementing power and lighting and technology. I had worked for a network systems integrator, and I had also represented owners. There's the architect who designs the facility, the construction company that builds the facility, and the owner who's buying the facility. So I had unique experience, and I ended up not being the program manager, but being the right-hand person of the MSP representative that was in charge of the construction facility. So all the technology that was in the facility, I had a hand in designing. And then I was also the liaison to the amateur radio community who volunteers to help. I don't know in other parts of the world, but here it's called RACES. And there's ARES, which are different acronyms for the people who are radio operators who volunteer to help during emergencies. There's also MARS and CAP, which are like the military support organizations. So I worked with them to kind of design the dream facility for them, and the antenna field and all the different systems and technologies. And then I also was the liaison to the broadcasting community for public alerting. So I was working with the broadcasters to implement what was needed for their needs too, for the public broadcasting community. But back to what a hardened facility is, it's in international standards, it's called a class 1 facility. So this facility would withstand an EF5 tornado, which is 250 mile an hour winds. For example, the windows, which there were not very many of because this glass costs $1,500 a square foot. It would withstand a 2x4 hitting it and on at 100 miles an hour twice. The third time you get a duck, it's going to come through. But for example, on the doors, when the doors close, steel bars go up into the frame of the building to hold it closed against the pressure of the wind. And the roof is reinforced concrete and steel. So it's anecdotal, but you could probably have a semi lifted up and dropped down on the roof of that facility, and you'd hear it, but you would be okay. The walls are 18-inch thick. So this is the kind of engineering stuff that you get into when you're working on a hardened facility. And then on top of that, you have all your redundancies. So you have electrical, and you have 2 or 3 different feeds from the utility companies. in case one fails. Then you have generators, but you have redundant generators. So if one fails, the other one works. And then you have a triple redundancy where the military can, or the you can bring in a generator on a truck and hook it up if everything before that fails.
Wow.
Think about your sewer, your bathrooms. What if that system goes down? So you have a backup septic tank system, a backup waste facility. Think about what if the water in the city goes bad? So you have a backup well. So that's what's involved in a hardened facility. Just a quick example of it.
Sounds very, very complicated. And
Yeah.
you got the amateur radio community involved as well, and you're talking
Yeah.
about the public alert, public broadcasters. Was that always intentional from the designers and the purpose of it, that it would be connected to a range of different communities to make sure that the messaging got out there in as many different formats as possible?
Yes, because as a state center, it has to be the backup for everybody in the state. Now, if I was designing a local center, a city or a county or another smaller unit of government, I might not need all of that. But this was a state facility. So, for example, in the public alerting, we had to be able to be assured we could send out a public alert for a city or a county who had that capability incapacitated. So while you might be, let's say, a city emergency operations center, your public alerting might rely on an internet connection or a radio. At a state center, you might want a satellite uplink or more redundancy. So another capability is that, like in a city one, you might not need the capability to hold press conferences or broadcast from there. But in a state one, you're going to want a capability where the governor or whoever your authority at the state level is to come in there and to broadcast out to the broadcast community. So most city and local levels of government and hospitals and other critical infrastructure have volunteer radio capabilities to assist them. Most health departments also maintain volunteer radio capabilities. And at the state level, you need to coordinate all of that together for the whole state. So you need more capabilities.
One of the initiatives that I believe you worked on was creating secure live video feeds from incidents back to a command center or to a team that was leading the response. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, keep in mind, it was 6 or 7 years ago, which is like 100 years in technology years. So right now, after COVID, I mean, that's not anything. You would just get on your phone and do something like this. But with the new facility, we had some grant funding became available, and our captain, since it's a state police, a captain ran the organization, instructed me to do a technology assessment, which is another thing that engineers can do. And I asked him if he wanted the capability to see video from a scene. And, you know, he said yes. And so I developed that capability for him at the time, 6 years ago. So I don't know if you're familiar with GIS, Geographic Information Systems, but GIS personnel have what's called portable mapping equipment, and they basically put on a big backpack and trek around. So I did the same thing, but with a camera, and I did some research, and I used the same system that the U.S. government uses to stream their video back from all of their overseas facilities, like all the consulates and different bases and such. So 6 years ago, that was very, very hard to do. But, now it's become a lot easier. But the interesting thing about this is you do something like that, there's a technology life cycle. It starts out with early adopters, people who need something so bad that they'll pay any price and go through any hassle to use it. And then it becomes more and more available, so more people use it, and it fades out. Well, nobody had ever really used video, and it kind of turns out that you don't really need the video to respond to the incident. Was never used that way. The video is extremely useful in the recovery phase, in showing damage and in helping to assist with the recovery. So as an example, you have a wildfire or some flooding, and it wipes out a lot of nature trails. Well, it's very advantageous for the people that are surveying to show their managers and show the what's the term for a scientist, like a forest scientist, the naturists, the scientists, what the damage has been without them being there. Let's say dive teams looking at foundations of bridges after turned out to have the most advantage for video. The other is in Homeland Security incidents. So, for example, protests in a city center and sharing the security cameras from the municipal buildings that are around securely to teams that are out in the field. If there's any techies on the line, there's a thing coming called ATSC, which is going to allow broadcasters to target broadcasts specifically to, let's say, your pocket device with secure video using the television stations. And that's a good capability that's coming soon in the States. I don't know about internationally.
Can you tell us again the name of that?
ATSC. It's
that's with
basically creating television with the internet.
Okay. Where do you see the potential for drones for doing this type of thing with video and communicating back in this recovery phase, like you've just said, drones?
That's another thing that just personally I'm very interested in, is the application of new technologies. Now, drones are not my area. I did assist the State Police Aviation Department with some air to ground video capabilities, which is you have your helicopter or your fixed wing aircraft, and they have a microwave transmitter on a camera, and it automatically tracks an antenna, which could be up to 30 or so miles away, and beams the video down to a facility or a truck that has been brought an we called it an uplink truck. It was a dually, which is basically a pickup truck with the 4 wheels on the back end, that was donated by the National Guard, and they outfitted it, and it would receive video, display it there, pump it to the local operations center, and then uplink it to the video systems that people could access and view. And so you could securely view the video. Now was used for emergency response, but it's also for law enforcement, for drug raids, and coordinated tracking suspects that are running away, things like that. So we did work on some drone stuff, but the most interesting thing to me was the anti-drone equipment that is being put out, jammers and things that shoot nets to take drones out if they're a threat. So if we're talking about Homeland Security and emergency management, you get into drones. Now, the drones are more handled by a GIS specialist, of which I am not. And so I wouldn't want to comment on that too much. But what's important there, what they have worked on a lot, our GIS specialist, is integrating the databases that are available from the county and local governments. So there's a database somewhere that shows your house, that you own it, who lives there, what the phone numbers are. And when the drone flies over, so let's say your neighborhood is destroyed. If a drone overflies it, it can map and say that there's used to be a house there and it belonged to this person and 5 people live there. And so that is most of what the GIS people in my area focused on with the drone. Also, it's used for accident reconstruction in law enforcement. And so if there's a fatality in an accident on the highway or anywhere, they will drone map the whole scene. And then they can actually do 3D modeling and construct fly-throughs and things for the lawyers and courts and the accident reconstruction specialists. So
this is really interesting stuff, adding value to the ability of emergency responders to be able to plan how they respond and recovery, as you've said, after a major disaster. Just as we wrap up, Don, for people who are maybe they're at university or at a technical college and they're thinking about what sort of careers to pursue with their skill set and their knowledge and their certifications, or maybe there's someone like you who's in the private sector who has a wealth of knowledge and experience and that diversity of experience that other people might not have, such as you had with facilities and hardened facilities and integrating services. What would you say to people who might consider moving from the private sector into emergency management, or people considering starting their careers? What would you say to them?
First of all, like, if you're a techie type person and you're watching this is all just like the most fun stuff that we would be talking about, ourselves among specialists. But if you're in the private sector, there's a whole different culture between private sector and government. Private sector things are based more short term. So you have to accomplish something fast. And it's based on profit or revenue reduction. And in the government sector, what I found out is you have the opportunity to work on longer term things. So you can work on a program, let's say, unifying the technology across every emergency operations center in your local government unit, you know, your state or county or whatever else. I mean, that's something that might take 5 or 6 years, 10 years, and you can actually work on things like that, bigger long-term projects where you do some real good for the public. But also, it's just in emergency operations, just in my area, you say electrical engineering. So in a private company, you might have a job where you're designing lighting systems or you're working on developing a chip. But like what I did is I worked on heating, cooling, construction, electrical, communications, satellite uplinks, broadcast studios, amateur radio. Just in amateur radio, there's just amazing capabilities. I mean, these are people who get up in the middle of the night and bounce a radio signal off the moon just for fun. They can access the internet. They can email, file transfers, encryption, phone, over radio. There's just an amazing amount of capabilities there. Antenna field design. So there's a really wide range of technology you can get into in emergency operations. And that's not even talking about field support types of things. If you think about going to a disaster scene, and I gotta get everybody there working data, and it has to be secure because there's reporters and people snooping around, and it might be a Homeland Security scene. It might spread out in the middle of a forest, you know, things like this. So there's just a whole lot of real interesting problems to work on and projects to work on. That's what I would say.
Well, Don, thank you very much for your time. With the show notes, I've got the link to your YouTube account for people who may want to connect with you, get your advice and guidance in the future. Is there another way for people to get hold of you besides your LinkedIn account?
No, I think LinkedIn's probably the best at this time.
Okay.
I'm actively watching it. And then I can, if something better comes along, I'll just contact you and you can post it.
Sure thing. Well, Don, don't go anywhere. Just as I wrap up, I'd love to have a quick little chat with you after we wrap up the show. So
Sure.
Everyone else, great to have you with us. Thanks for watching the recording as well. If you're watching the recording, do reach out to Don if you have an interest in this area or advice and guidance you're seeking. And his link to his LinkedIn is in the show notes. And we look forward to seeing you again on another emergency management video cast.